Oh. Okay, I call this meeting of the Milwaukie City Council to order. I don't have the number of the meeting. Oh, well, that's all right. This meeting is being held in person at City Hall and by video conference. The public may participate in this meeting by coming to City Hall or joining the Zoom webinar. The meeting is being broadcast live on the city's YouTube channel and Comcast Cable Channel 30 in city limits. There will be opportunities for the public to speak during this meeting. If you would like to address council, you may come to City Hall or participate via Zoom. If you are interested in speaking, please let staff know by filling out a yellow comment card for those at City Hall or by emailing ocr@milwaukieoregon.gov for those on Zoom. When it is time to take public comment, staff will monitor the comment cards, email inbox, and Zoom participant list and chat. We will take comments in the order they are received and seen. Written comments may be emailed to ocr@milwaukieoregon.gov. Spanish translation services are available upon request. The public is asked to request translation and other meeting accessibility services at least 48 hours before the meeting. Contamos con servicio de traducción al español cuando sea solicitado. Se pide al público que solicite servicios de traducción y otros servicios de accesibilidad para reuniones por lo menos 48 horas antes de la reunión. Translation services are also available in other languages. For the record, both Council President Nicodemus and Councilor Stavengard have been excused from tonight's meeting. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
The City of Milwaukie respectfully acknowledges that our community is located on the ancestral homeland of the Clackamas people. In 1855, the surviving members of the Clackamas signed the Willamette Valley Treaty, also known as the Kalapuya, etc. Treaty, with the federal government in good faith. We offer our respect and gratitude to the indigenous people of this land. And we always start off with our announcements. Come out to enjoy a free live performance by acclaimed performer Red Yarn on Thursday, July 20th from 5:30 to 7:30 p.m. at Ardenwald Park. The performance weaves folk songs and puppetry into high-energy interactive shows and is great for the entire family. Milwaukie Porch Fest continues for the next 2 Fridays, including July 21st and 28th from 6:30 to 8:30 p.m. each night. Come out to enjoy a free festival of performances on porches, driveways, and public spaces across the city. The event is organized each year by the Milwaukie Arts Committee. Learn more at milwaukeeporchfest.com. Join the Oregon Coast Aquarium for a myth-busting celebration of sharks on Thursday, July 27th at 10:30 a.m. at Scott Park, which is next to the Letting Library. The program is followed by a free sack lunch from 11 a.m. to 12 p.m. for ages 1 through 18. City Manager Ann Ober hosts another open door session on Friday, July 28th from 9 to 10 a.m. at City Hall. Attend the session to ask questions, raise concerns, or just to find out more about what the city is doing. No sign up is necessary, so feel free to just stop by. For more information about each of these events and others, please visit the city's homepage at milwaukieoregon.gov or call 503-786-7555. All right. And under proclamations and awards, we have the Police Chief Luke Straight here tonight with a Lifesaving Award. And while he comes up and gets settled, I just want to say that it seems like it's been a crazy few months for the police department and in this town, with officers getting hit by cars, children getting kidnapped, drug arrests, et cetera, et cetera. It's just east of our city, 2 Clackamas County officers getting shot. It is in times when we have events like these that I'm so thankful. Well, I'm always so thankful that we have such a great police department, and everybody handles everything so professionally. So thank you, Chief Straight, and all of your crew, and I'll turn the floor over to you.
Good evening. Thank you, Mayor Beatty, council, and members of the public. As you stated, my name is Luke Straight, and I'm the police chief for the Milwaukie Police Department. I'm here this evening for an award presentation, as you mentioned, a Lifesaving Award. And this award was nominated by our officer, Ron Glenn, who is with us here this evening. And I'd like to ask him to come up and join me, as well as Anna Sparks, who is the award recipient. And if you want to just introduce yourselves and tell us just briefly a little bit about you.
My name's Anna Sparks. I was born in New Hampshire, raised in Salem, Oregon, and work at DPSST, the Oregon State Department of Public Safety and Standards, as a support specialist with the class coordinators and instructors.
Oh, great.
Thank you.
I'm Ron Glenn, born and raised in Portland, and 23 and a half or so years ago, I got sworn in here as a police officer of the city of Milwaukie. And as of last week, I can retire any day of the week now.
But you're not going to, are you?
So I'm going to go ahead and read a commendation that basically tells the story. And then afterwards, we'll just talk briefly about it. But thank you for making time for this evening. The commendation goes as follows. On March 24th, 2023, Officer Ron Glenn, a 23-year veteran of the Milwaukie Police Department, reported to the Oregon Department of Public Safety Standards and Training in Salem to serve as an instructor for the day. As Officer Glenn walked into the facility, he suffered a sudden cardiac event. Fellow Academy staff, Anna Sparks, introduced herself to Officer Glenn when he arrived at the facility. When Ms. Sparks reached out to shake Ron's hand, Ron collapsed suddenly without warning. Ms. Sparks immediately checked on him and found him to be unconscious and not breathing. Ms. Sparks immediately called 911 and began CPR until a Department of Corrections employee and a fellow instructor saw what was happening and came to assist her. Ms. Sparks then retrieved a nearby automated external defibrillator. The AED was applied and later a shock was administered. Emergency medical services personnel arrived to assist, and they transported Officer Glenn to the Salem Hospital. Ron survived this critical event and has recovered fully thanks to the quick and heroic work of Anna Sparks. On May 15th, Officer Glenn returned to light duty status with the Milwaukie Police Department, and this evening, July 18th, Officer Glenn will return to full duty on patrol. We all look back during our lives and question the contributions we've made. Thanks to Anna Sparks' quick and heroic actions, Ron has been reunited with his family, some of whom are with him here this evening, and his coworkers. Ron and Serena Glenn, the Milwaukie Police Department, and the City of Milwaukie will be forever grateful to Anna Sparks for her quick intervention, providing the second chance at life to our friend, family member, and teammate. Anna Sparks is hereby presented the Milwaukie Police Department Lifesaving Award dated July 18th of 2023. That written commendation is framed here before you and is also accompanied by the Lifesaving Medal. Obviously, we can't thank you enough for what you did. And we're very, very grateful. And you and your family who joins you here today has to be incredibly proud of you. And thank you all for coming.
Thank you so much. I'm just so glad I was there. And thank you. Thank you to all of you for your support.
I love you.
Love you guys.
Well, I'm glad you were there too.
Yeah. know,
So you and I are the only ones walking down the through the security portal there.
right. I mean, to go from complete strangers to immediately connected for life.
That's right.
I'll love you for the rest of my life.
That escalated quickly, didn't it?
Yes, yeah. Don't let it go.
Too late.
Thank you.
Yeah, and thank you all for just taking a moment out of everybody's busy lives to be here this evening and just to be grateful.
One more real quick thing I just wanted to add, in addition to the corrections officers, there was also a couple other DPSST employees, Chris Inquist, Jay Shadwick came running. They helped, numerous people helped, and I'm grateful for all of them as well.
Thank you.
Well, we really appreciate you're obviously a level-headed, quick person in crisis, and I'm seeing some nods back there. And so we're all grateful for what you did, and it's really nice to see both families here.
Yeah, it is. Thank you.
Any of the other counselors?
Yeah, the world can be a dark and scary place, and sad at sometimes, but it's moments like these, the actions that really show what humanity is. And it's an inspiration to see both of you here. And this gives a light, this gives hope. This lets us know that there's just enough good in the world to push back. So I appreciate what you've done. And I appreciate your commitment to the safety and the well-being of our Milwaukie residents. I really appreciate it. And to the families, the sacrifices you make, and in families that we get pulled into a lot of these things, and it's just tremendous to see the amount of support here. So I really appreciate it. You truly are a hero, both of you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, thank you, Anna. And I know that, these things just don't happen. They happen because, you had the foresight to sign up for the CPR class and probably have gone through it several times through research and everything like that. And it's one thing to go through the course, but to go through it time and time again so that you can actually recall it when it's needed and that kind of thing. And so, it's not a spur of the moment thing. You weren't thinking about this event when you were going through the CPR class, but you were, able to employ that knowledge and that skill when it's needed. And, you've made a lot of people in this room happy, so I just can't thank you enough. Thank you.
Again, happy I was there and it worked out the way it did.
Yeah, I guess.
I just wanted to thank the department for also bringing things like this forward. I think it's really important. Our officers are often the people who save the day, and I really appreciate them saving the day. But sometimes it takes a village, and you were a part of our village. So thank you for making sure you could come back.
Honored to be part of it.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Counselor Khosrabadi wanted to add something, I think.
Yeah, this was just a touch on Mayor Beatty's previous comments on our police department and what our officers have been facing lately. Difficult doesn't describe what you all have faced. And I just want to tell you from the bottom of my heart that you are appreciated, you are loved, you're cared for. This city, we can't be who we are without you. And everyone in that department do an incredible job. You guys are heroes, and my son has great people to look up to. Thank you.
Thank you.
I know you all want to stay for the rest of the night, so if you want to hang out, no, if you want to take off, feel free. Thank you.
So much. Yeah, thank you for coming.
Thanks for coming, everyone.
So much.
All of the
While the crowd leaves, Mayor Beatty, I can report that
It's great to see you.
this is the 2,384th meeting.
Okay.
I apologize, the script didn't have that in there.
2,384th. Okay. So we won't quite make it to 2,400 in this city hall.
No.
Okay. I'm gonna have to have another tissue, sorry. Community comments. This is the part of the agenda during which council will hear community member comments regarding city business. Before we begin, is there any follow-up from the July 11th community comments, Ms. Ober?
There are not.
Okay. For those in person who wish to speak, and I should note, this is community comments on things that are not otherwise on the agenda. If you're on the agenda, if you're here to comment on something on the agenda later, this is not the time for you. So before I read this long script, do we have anybody who's here to give general community comments? We haven't received any yellow cards, and staff is not seeing anybody on Zoom or anything wanting to comment. Okay, then I am going to forego that long script and save us all a couple minutes off of our life and move on to the consent agenda. Tonight's consent agenda includes minutes of the City Council June 13th, 2023 study session, June 20th, 2023 work session, and June 20th, 23 regular session. A resolution authorizing a public improvements contract with Tapani Inc. for a not to exceed amount of $4,112,478 for the Meek Street Pipe Installation North Phase project, and a resolution authorizing an engineering services contract with Century West Engineering Corporation for a not to exceed amount of $757,874 for the Harvey Street Improvements Project. Does any member of council wish to remove a consent agenda item? Seeing none, I will entertain a motion.
I move to approve consent agenda as presented.
A second.
It's been moved and seconded to approve the consent agenda as presented. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, say no. Consent agenda is approved unanimously. So we have 4 business items, I think, tonight. And the first one is the public mural program clarification. And for that, I invite Jordan Imlaw, our communications program manager and liaison to our arts committee, to come up and.
Okay. Secrets. City manager shared, and then temporary files.
If there's a problem with a presentation or something, we can swap order. If you.
Oh, I don't think you want to. I think this one's going to be pretty fast. And actually, I think we can probably start without the slide deck if we need to. Is that fair?
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah. So I'm.
Go for it.
Thank you, city councilors. Thanks for having me today. We're here with a pretty straightforward question and just like maybe small discussion. Thank you, Scott.
Kelly heard me say something about swapping order, so she came up. Hers should be pretty quick too, I would think.
I think we're just about there, sorry. It's my fault. I should have warned Scott that I had a PowerPoint. Now we should be able to share it.
Oh,
thank you, Scott.
Very nice. Public art.
So we're just here to talk about the use of the public art funding. That's been, this funding has been given by City Council in the past. It's usually been done during either the biennium budget cycle, preparing it and adding it into the budget, or when the arts committees come for their annual updates to make a special request based on either a special project or mural that may be in the works. Just to kind of give you just a short overview, we have 4 murals that have been created using this funding that the Arts Committee's received. And just recently, when they were discussing other opportunities for art in the community, they asked, oh, well, could this be potentially used for other public art like sculptures? It sounds like when former Mayor Mark Gamba was on the Arts Committee, he thought it was just for public murals only. But then other former members thought it could be, the intent was for more than just murals. And there isn't a lot of documentation, so that's why we're here, to clear up the ambiguity.
I should also share, the former mayor does not care. But at the time, he just thought that was his recollection.
Thank you for that. That's helpful. These are the 4 murals, and then we actually have one coming in the works. So that's just down at the bottom on the Milwaukie Community Center. But the one that was created first using the funding was the one on Chan Stakery by Joe Rizzo. Next was the Welcome to Milwaukie mural on the Milwaukie Reservoir tank. Next came the one on Chapel Theater, and that's actually panels that were painted and then attached to the building. So a slightly different way of doing it, but still worked. And then the most recent one was the one by Kanani Miyamoto on the post office right by the plaza. And then the next artist that we have lined up who just signed a contract was Alex Chu, where he's about to sign the final contract. And he's done some other murals in Portland too, and he has a really good background and experience in creating these public murals. So we're excited about that. But what the Arts Committee is looking to do now is get some public sculptures. And this is kind of a smattering of kind of some things that they've been looking into. So with the sculptures, obviously there's more variety, but then also adding sculptures to the allowed funding use would help other artists too in the community. There's actually a large number of sculptors in Milwaukie and the surrounding area, and this would provide more opportunities for them to create and put something out in the public space. It's also will add some versatility to the funding. There's sometimes when we usually get $20,000 each for every couple of years. There was also a time when it was saved up for a while too, but sometimes when we've paid for most of it, like for some murals, we have like a small amount of funding left, and so it helps. We can't really pay for a whole mural, but we could use that chunk of money to maybe buy like a sculpture or something like that instead of maybe trying to either bank it or wait for something else. It's also quite hard sometimes to get a mural location. It requires an easement from a property owner. And so you usually have to get the business and the property owner in agreement, and then also have them okay to sign a 5-year easement to let the mural stay there so it's not taken down within that amount of time. And we've gone around to lots of businesses. I mean, there's more out there, but sometimes, yeah, that's the tricky part to get those. And then it also, we feel like there's some shared similarities between the sculptures and the murals. The intent is the same. It's to, liven up these spaces, make these vibrant areas that the community can enjoy, be welcoming. Also find some creation of sense of place. Like one of the ideas that has come up was creating like a Milwaukie sign, kind of like the Rip City sign in this example here, where people can be the I in IE to kind of highlight our unique spelling of Milwaukie, or getting geese, that everyone loves. Actually, all of these sculptures are from Oregon, except the goose one is from Canada, obviously. They seem like the only ones that want to create a goose sculpture so far. But there's sort of an added element to sculptures that there's a little bit more, they can be more dynamic. Like the example in the lower right corner, and actually the one above it too, the top one is from Paisley, Oregon. Those lights change colors depending on I think it's depending on the outside, time of day. And I think there's a way for people to come and change the colors themselves. And then the one below, it's in Beaverton by the Public Safety Building, their new one, and those change colors too. And then the other kind of one on the bottom left, it lights up, but it's also like a gatekeeping sculpture that's in Lake Oswego. And so we feel like there's some things that murals can do, and they all kind of have the similar things, but sculptures kind of get that added extra little bit going on with them. And I really think, and the Arts Committee agrees that this is kind of maybe what City Council has wanted in the past is more opportunities for public art and more just things out there to kind of highlight what makes Milwaukie and make those connections with each other. And we feel like sculptures can do that. So this is the Arts Committee's request. It's just to be able to use that funding to buy sculptures for the city as well as murals.
Excellent work. I just wanted to add, the reason we're here tonight is because in the budget document, it actually says it's for murals.
Yeah.
So in order to use it for something else, because that's a council approved document, we just need you all to tell us that we can actually change it in its use. So thanks.
Any questions?
No.
Okay. Well, I will say that my recollection is similar to Mayor Gamba's, that I think we were focused on murals at the time because we hadn't, other than Chris Haberman's mural, I think, we hadn't had any murals. And we had this sculpture garden, and it seemed, and I gather that the funding for that comes out of the city manager's office budget?
It does, yeah.
Okay.
And it's $1,000 per sculpture that
Per
rotate
sculpture.
in and out. Yeah. So
Yeah, 'cause we
pay for
don't-
about $3,000 a year for them.
Here, right. So we had that, and it was going smoothly, and so the focus was on murals, but I don't think anybody really intended that, to be so exclusive. So, I have no problem with the proposed clarification.
Thank you.
Anyone else?
No objections.
No objections, and considering my wife is on the committee, I gotta tread carefully here, so.
It's no bearing on your decision.
Do we actually need to do a motion?
No.
No, you're okay.
I don't think so. I just wanted to make a comment. Unlike the murals, which we have an easement agreement that's formulated to allow us to put a mural on the side of a building, and there's maintenance obligations there. There will be, and we'll have to work with the Arts Committee on this, there will be some different legal underpinnings for a sculpture, because depending on where it's sited in the right-of-way, ongoing maintenance and liability issues, certainly things that can be overcome, but it'll be a little bit different process that we'll have to walk through.
Well, and I know, Lake Oswego has a great, sculpture program where they have, they have a whole committee that picks them, and some of them are like ours. They're a loaner. They're not owned by the city, but then every year I think they have a voting and they buy one more or something. And, so, I think there's great models out there for sculpture programs, and hopefully we don't have to reinvent the wheel. And, yeah.
Well, one of the things that we've talked about is in Lake Oswego, they have a foundation. And we've talked with the Arts Committee several times about creating some sort of nonprofit so that there is some of that distance. It continues to be a discussion. I don't think we're decided one way or the other, but insurance and other ownership and all sorts of things start getting complicated in this. Doesn't mean we shouldn't do it.
Okay. All right. If nothing else, I
No more
think
questions. Well, thank you so much.
we're good. Yep.
Really appreciate the time and the clarification. I'm sure they'll be happy to know that. Thank you.
Yep. Thank you. All right. Next up, adoption of revised public contracting rules, ordinance and resolution. So these do not have to be a public hearing. They're just, okay. Okay. All right, and we have Kelly Tucker, our accounting and contract specialist.
Hello, good evening. So I am here before you tonight to request 2 action items. The first of which is adopting revised public contracting rules that will modify the equity-based requirements that we have for public procurements. And the second piece is a request to increase the city manager's delegated authority for signing contracts. So the first item, the public contracting rules. So when I was here last month, we kind of went over the reasons why we were requesting proposed modifications to the public contracting rules, specifically towards the equity requirements, the results that we got back from an independent consultant, as well as some internal research that we did. So to kind of highlight the material changes that would be involved in those revised rules would be that we would be changing the equity based scoring for selection criteria from what it is now, which is kind of a subjective selection where the department gets to choose how they want to incorporate the equity criteria into their solicitation. It could be things like workforce diversity from that organization, or how they're going to incorporate diversity into the key personnel that's on a project. And the concern was that was too subjective. It increased some legal exposure. So the request here is to change that criteria and just have it based on whether the firm that's proposing is certified through the state of Oregon's Office for Certification Office for Business Inclusion and Diversity, or COBID. So if the firm is COBID certified, they would get the points. If they are not COBID certified, they get 0 points. Nothing would change as far as the percentage. It would remain at least 20% of the total scored criteria. The second material change would be that we would remove and eliminate the Milwaukie specific COVID waiver application that we had for COVID eligible businesses. So these are businesses who are not certified through the state's program, but we would determine ultimately could be eligible to get certified and just haven't gone through that process yet. Again, there was some legal exposure to us not doing any kind of due diligence on our end or requiring documents. So we would eliminate that program. And again, it would go back to they need to get certified through the state, which is something we found throughout a lot of the agencies in the areas that many agencies rely on the state's program for that certification. We'd also be requesting within the proposed rules that we add a requirement in, and that is to advertise in a minority-focused publication or with a minority-focused organizational outlet like the Oregon Minority Entrepreneurs Association or something similar. And this is so that we can increase contracting opportunities to COVID-certified businesses who are likely going to be reading those advertisements. And this would be in addition to the general newspaper requirement that we have for public or for formal procurements. Since we met last month at the June 20th work session, myself, the city manager, and the assistant city manager also met with the Equity Steering Committee and had this conversation with them with these same proposed changes. It was a good conversation. I think overall there was some concern as to why we're doing this, but in the end, they understood that there was that legal exposure. They did have a couple takeaways for us to consider, one of which the concern was that there appears to be a gap in resources for businesses in getting COVID certified. Some of the folks on the Equity Steering Committee are COVID certified with their business and others are not, but there seems to kind of be a gap. And they almost expressed, a few folks expressed that they would almost need like a guide from start to finish, someone they can ask questions to, someone that can advise them what documentation to pull together to kind of help them through that process, because it is quite intense from what we understand. And while we as a city don't have the resources to assist them with that, we don't have staff to assign that can just help them through the process. We are going to look into whether we can maybe partner with some organizations like Forward Platform or Mercy Corps that maybe we can hand them off to, and that they would have somebody to reach out to without having to do that legwork themselves. So we're going to continue to look into that piece of it. The other request that we got from the steering committee was that they do want to see the state of Oregon's disparity study results. That is a study that's in process right now, and I don't think it ends until this fall. But we did promise that we would provide those results to them once they're distributed out to the state and local agencies.
Can you say a little bit more about what that, I'm sorry.
No,
What
yes,
that study is?
Yeah, so the disparity study, and I am no expert by any means, but generally speaking, it would be a study that's done by an independent consultant that's looking at the market in which we're making procurements for a certain, duration, what types of products or goods, services that we're buying, and whether or not there's actual disparity to the businesses that are getting awarded contracts and purchases. It's possible there isn't a disparity, and disadvantaged businesses like women-owned, minority-owned, emerging small businesses, your service-disabled, veteran-owned businesses are getting ample contracts, just as those businesses who might not fit into that category. But then it's also possible that through that study, you find that there is a disparity and there is a need to incorporate more equity criteria into your solicitations.
Okay, so we're going to take this one first and the second one separately. So questions, I guess, on this one?
Yeah, just real quick, thank you for the information. Is there any resources at the county level to help those businesses get COVID certified?
That's a great question.
'Cause maybe we can do something.
I'm going to look into that. Yes.
So one of the things that I also just wanted to highlight, we're going to be bringing the equity study back to the equity steering committee, and then we'll be bringing it to you all in September. My hope is that with the new staff person on board, we can start prioritizing the things that we want to focus on. So when we talk to the equity steering committee, we'll say, hey, you made this recommendation. How does this compare to other work that we're asking this person to do, just to make sure you know what their recommendation is and the full lineup of options for them to be focused on. Kelly is amazing.
Yes.
I think I have had multiple meetings this week about how amazing and that she is overworked. So I don't want her to take it on. I think we need to make sure that we're pushing this to the rest of the team if we're going to do it, which is why I'm saying this. So the answer is yes. And I'd like to have this discussion as a part of our equity steering committee dialogue. Sound good?
Absolutely, yep.
Thanks.
Yes, but thank you for.
Yeah, that's the only question I have.
No questions or comments. Thank you, Kelly.
Okay, thank you.
I would just note if some of the equity steering committee have gone through the process, they may have people to recommend that helped them shepherd them through too. So
Yeah, one of the members actually did talk about Mercy Corps and some other groups. So, and that's the group that we had use, I think it was the PSB 5 or 6 years ago, and leader training here in town. So there are partnership opportunities. And when we can also have it trigger when we get somebody who contacts us that we believe would qualify for COVID, but isn't asking for the points. We can also, that can be a trigger back to them to say, actually, we can help you. Here are the connections we'd recommend, and we can come up with a set email that we send them outlining how to process that.
right.
Thank
Great. All right, well, if there are no more questions, I would entertain a motion.
I move for the first and second reading by title only and adoption of the ordinance acting as the local contract review board, amending Milwaukie Municipal Code, Chapter 3.05, Local Contract Review Board, to increase delegation of authority to the city manager.
These are backwards, aren't they?
Are they?
Ooh. Yeah, so read the next one. The one on page 7.
7.
Yeah.
Okay. I move to approve the resolution acting as the local contract review board, repealing existing public contracting rules and adopting revised public contracting rules, incorporating modified equity requirements.
I second.
It's been moved and seconded for approval of the resolution acting as the local contract review board, repealing existing contracting rules and adopting revised public contracting rules, incorporating modified equity requirements. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say no. None heard. It passes unanimously. Does she need to read? I noticed the other one has read the ordinance 2 times by title only.
Resolutions don't require title.
Yeah.
Okay,
The rules are passed by resolution.
okay.
The authority is by ordinance.
Oh, okay,
Sorry for flipping those two things in the script.
okay. So
Okay.
now
So
we'll
then
talk
the
about.
second item, I know, right? So the second item is to request to increase the city manager's delegated contract signing authority from $100,000 where it stands now, up to $250,000. This is being proposed to just kind of assist with administrative ease. Things are just costing more these days, and departments aren't able to get contracts in for $100,000 like they once used to. It still goes through an adequate budgetary review, and the $250,000 will fall in line with formal procurement thresholds. So the council will still be seeing those larger projects come before them for authorization. I think it's important to note you guys do not have to delegate any contract signing authority to the city manager. Historically, that's been done. So we just request that we consider it. It seems like every 10 years. It's been about 12 years since we last increased it, but just to at least consider it and see if that's something that would make sense for what's going on in our world today.
All right. Any questions about that?
No.
No questions.
No questions. Okay. Well, if there are no questions, I would entertain a motion. This time, the one you tried to read before.
Can we rewind?
Yeah.
I move for the first and second reading by title only and adoption of the ordinance acting as the local contract review board, amending Milwaukie Municipal Code, Chapter 3.05, Local Contract Review Board to increase delegation of the authority to the city manager.
I second.
It's been moved and seconded for the first and second readings by title only and adoption of the ordinance acting as the local contract review board, amending Milwaukie Municipal Code, Chapter 3.05, Local Contract Review Board to increase delegation of authority to the city manager. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed say no. None heard. Ms. Ober, would you read the ordinance 2 times by title only?
An ordinance of the City of Milwaukie, Oregon, acting as the local contract review board, amending Milwaukie Municipal Code, MMC Chapter 3.05, Local Contract Review Board, to increase the delegation of authority to the city manager. And again, an ordinance of the City of Milwaukie, Oregon, acting as the local contract review board, amending Milwaukie Municipal Code, MMC Chapter 3.05, Local Contract Review Board, to increase delegation of the authority to the city manager.
And Mr. Stoffer, would you please poll the council?
Counselor Massey,
Aye.
Counselor Kraushaar-Body,
Aye.
Mayor Beatty.
Aye.
Motion carried 3-0, ordinance 2232.
All right. Thank you very much, Kelly.
Thank you.
All right, and next up, we're ahead of schedule. Look at that. Tree code amendments. Our Climate and Natural Resources Manager, Natalie Rogers.
Oh, no. It's less for me to mess up. It senses it's me.
Well, good evening, Council and Mayor Beatty. I'm Natalie, Climate and Natural Resources Manager. I'm here today in our kind of the second installation of a conversation around just tree code cleanup. Let's see. So as I mentioned, I think last time I was here was in April. And we gave a little update on our tree code so far. So for Milwaukie, and I'll touch on which trees are regulated, but tree code is still relatively new. We've always had a public tree code of sense, but even earlier, just a few years ago, we updated that. So tree code overall and tree permitting processes are pretty new to the community, pretty new to staff. We're still trying to figure things out and make sure that it's efficient and it's flowing as we intended when we developed the code. So I always like to kind of return to the big picture if possible. Why does the city care about trees and why do we want to regulate them? There's a lot of research coming out that really kind of emphasizes the importance trees play, not only for our community health benefits, our climate benefits, but overall just the multitude of benefits and co-benefits they provide our community. So, for example, and these values come from EPA, but trees shade hot surfaces. We've been seeing these 95, 119-degree weather patterns, and walking barefoot outdoors can be treacherous in that weather, and especially just being outdoors. And so trees shade hot surfaces by 20 to 45 degrees Fahrenheit. Back when our heat dome hit just a few years ago, there was an area in Northeast Portland where surfaces of pavement reached over 165 degrees Fahrenheit. And that was because it was a very low canopied area, hot asphalt, hot concrete, and overall pretty unbearable. Trees provide that shade, and they're pretty awesome in that they're often seasonal too, which means that sometimes in the winter time, and actually they don't have leaves or pine needles, and so they can actually still allow that sunshine to come through when we kind of want it most. Trees also cool the air around them on top of shading pavement, and that's actually from evapotranspiration. It's essentially the way that they're breathing, and it can actually cool up to 9 degrees Fahrenheit, just even the air around us, along with other kind of air pollution and air quality benefits we see. Trees are critical to our green infrastructure as stormwater and surface water management. They provide important habitat for our wildlife. They actually reduce utility costs, not only for the city to manage surface water, where otherwise we would have to look for other gray infrastructure, cooling towers, all sorts of, expensive projects and installations to meet our state and federal requirements, but they also just decrease the average homeowner's energy bill. And that's from shading, and that's from a lot of other windbreaks. What's important though to note though, and why the city cares along with all these other benefits, is that trees aren't equally distributed across communities. And there's been a lot of historic redlining practices, which are racist practices where essentially it matches the investment communities used to make into certain neighborhoods where marginalized communities lived. So we're still seeing that in our region, and we're trying to, correct mistakes. And so one of the things that we do is we kind of hope to retain the trees we have, because as trees grow larger and they grow more mature, these benefits increase exponentially. However, trees are often removed as kind of the easiest choice or kind of the first action. And that's, a lot of times because trees don't, of course, have a voice of their own, but it's sometimes just the way it works in terms of project planning. And so the city likes to make sure that folks are considering alternatives before we actually remove this really important infrastructure. So for Milwaukee's tree code, we do regulate, we like to call them like 3 bins of trees. The first one, of course, is our public trees, street trees, park trees, trees on city-owned property. And that's regulated at 2 inches DBH, diameter at breast height, which is about 4.5 feet off the ground. There's also private residential development trees. And so that is essentially our largest type of tree application and permitting process, and it's for development in residential zones. And this is regulated whenever there's an additional dwelling unit created on the site. And then private residential non-development trees are regulated, and that's essentially when there's not development associated, but it's just an individual tree removal. And we look at those from type 1 being this very clear criteria for why a tree might need to be removed, from dying trees to infested trees to hazardous trees. And then we have type 2s, which are our discretionary permits. And this is if there's a healthy tree needing to be removed because of, let's say, somebody wants to install a pool in their backyard and there's just not necessarily an opportunity to work around the tree. We take those essentially as an individual consideration, and we try to work with the property owner to either save the tree or we allow removal with a healthy tree removal fee. And so we're coming back to you today because as we've been implementing this code, we've seen essentially some changes that need to happen to make sure that we're able to enforce the code as it was originally intended, as well as to make some process improvements to both increase the transparency and make it just clearer, more readable, and then really help staff as well better understand, where something is, we need to be following essentially a standard. And so I'm just going to run through pretty quickly some of the key code changes that we're proposing. And then at the very end, of course, I'll take questions. So one of the biggest things we did is we started expanding some definitions, definitions that we didn't think we maybe needed to include the first time around, but now we realize it's really helpful for us to have it pretty clearly written out. Things like, for example, healthy tree. What does a healthy tree mean? And as well as topping, which kind of got brought up earlier this evening, where we have a practice where it's not actually recommended from the ISA, which is the International Society of Arboriculture, which is essentially removing the crown or a significant portion of the crown of the tree without essentially consideration to tree health and condition. Sometimes that does need to happen. A lot of times, as Peter Pastorelli mentioned, utilities might need to top a tree because it's actually encroaching on active utility lines. Our tree code right now has programmatic permits actually as an option in there. We're working on that to really kind of flesh it out and make a permit application process for it, with our goal being that our programmatic permits, along with our public tree pruning permit, will essentially accommodate those situations where topping is necessary, and we'd prefer it over tree removal. Pollarding is essentially the better practice. And you can see here, as Courtney, our urban forester, has mentioned, the typical signs are knuckles on the tree, meaning that this tree has been essentially actively pruned and maintained for quite some years. And it's not just a one-time, we're removing the crown. That's important because essentially it shows history and intent. And oftentimes if a tree is topped, we don't see that. You just see kind of those straight across cups with no sign essentially of past pruning. So expanding definitions. One of the reasons why we have healthy tree is we really made sure that healthy tree was defined through the code, because one of the recommendations we're making in order to ensure that folks are actually getting a permit before they're removing a tree is saying that until you essentially have gone through the permitting process, the tree is healthy. And that's because we've had situations where the tree was removed, and after the fact, folks said, well, the tree was dying. Well, the tree was infested. However, without the tree being there, there's no way to confirm that. And so there's really no way for us to go and say whether or not the tree was actually dying or if it was infested. And that's how we have that supportive documentation requirement with our permitting process, and or an inspection actually from our urban forester to go out on site and check herself. And then topping, as I mentioned, we're defining that as tree removal. So that way, if a tree is topped, we can treat it the same way as if a tree was, fully removed, which effectively oftentimes is the situation. We still do have some ability to work to see if there's a mitigation potential, but we haven't necessarily seen that in most topping situations. Essentially, a big part of this, and I think Tim is here in case you have more specific questions too. But one of the things we realized with the tree code is our sections on penalties. This is to me, again, one of those challenges of writing code, reading code, and understanding what code allows, which is our existing penalty section, which reads as essentially you need to get a permit or there's penalties, is not the same as a violation section saying these are violations and these are the penalties. And so that's why we're recommending breaking it out into two different sections to essentially just state it very clearly. And this would be for both our public trees as well as the private tree sections of the code. It's important to note that in the code, many of the sections outside of 16.32.042 relate to public trees. And then 16.32.042, you can tell it's burned into my brain, is private trees. So we need to make sure we're having a violations and a penalty section in both of those to make sure that all of those regulated trees are essentially protected. And then as I talked about for healthy trees, really expanding on that definition and then infusing that into our development code as well. And so for our planting standard, as a refresher, we have a preservation standard, which says you need to retain trees on your property or pay a mitigation fee. And those are existing trees. Our planting standard is planting back trees to our 40% canopy goal that Milwaukie adopted in our climate action plan, urban forest management plan, and later our comprehensive plan. And to meet both of those standards, but especially our 40% canopy coverage standard, we want to make sure folks are planting and retaining healthy trees. Not necessarily having an unhealthy tree that is likely to die or at least fail in the next or in the near future be included on that 40% canopy goal, which is intended to be, helping Milwaukee's future generations as well. So really zeroing in that healthy condition trees, which include essentially fair condition and above, per our new definition, as meeting those standards and included in those inventories. And I tried to include a snippet of kind of where this scale of condition goes in. An arborist, this is really why we'd like to call in an arborist to kind of make those judgment calls of what condition the trees are in, because they can be very both subjective and, it's a living creature. There's a lot of things going into a tree condition, including, structural, insects, disease, decay, cavities, et cetera. And then the other kind of suggestion that we have, and we talked about it in April as well, was essentially, in order to, as we've been exploring middle housing in Milwaukie, we've been promoting things like an individual ADU. We're seeing where there's situations where maybe the full tree code, development tree code permit might not be needed for something like an ADU being built in an existing basement, an ADU, that's coming out of a conversion of an attic. Right now, per our code, that's an additional dwelling unit. It triggers our full development tree code, which includes things like protection fencing and plans, tree considerations of tree removals and planting standards. However, theoretically, if you're converting a basement or you're converting an attic, you shouldn't need to remove a tree, or if you do, it's not going to be at the same scale as a complete site redevelopment or land clearing. In those situations, our individual tree, private individuals or a non-development tree code would still apply. So, if you, for example, needed to construct a new driveway, or maybe you, needed to expand or have a construction staging area, or there's something that required you to remove a tree, we could process that as essentially a healthy tree removal through a non-development tree permit. Ends up actually saving a good amount of money because you don't need to work with a consulting arborist to develop a full arborist report and submittal documents. So, and it also saves staff time because those development tree code processes can be, a lot of hand holding and review. So again, non-development tree code still applies. We're not encouraging folks to remove trees. It's just a different process that's hopefully more streamlined for those building types and construction types. And so those were the major changes that we were presenting. We really wanted to get feedback and see if we were on the right track before kind of coming back with the code for potential adoption. We had some initial conversations with Tim and our code team. Of course, we're going to be working kind of into the future as well to make sure the next version we bring back, everyone's had a great chance of looking at and reviewing. Once we are coming back in September, we will also be bringing those fee schedule changes that Peter referenced earlier. And that really kind of aligns with kind of this conversation around healthy tree removals and considering trees as healthy removals. And so we'll be bringing those
Just a quick correction. So those will be brought back in August 1st, the fee schedule.
Sorry. Not September, August 1st.
Okay, and this also August 1st?
Code will be September.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
Okay.
So the code language will be in September. The fee schedules will just be earlier.
Okay.
Thank you. And then once we essentially make these changes and they're adopted, we need to go through and kind of revise their existing outreach materials and just the website information to make sure everyone has the most current information. And with that, that's all I got for
All
today.
right, questions?
Thank you, Natalie. I don't have any questions. Just if Tim, did you have anything to add to any of this? No? Okay. That's about it then. I don't have any, I'm good.
Thanks, Natalie. So there was quite a bit of outreach, when we originally did the tree code. So if we're going to do the tree code, did I hear September 1st? Is that what I heard?
For the adoption, hopefully, yeah.
Yeah. So are you envisioning it will go into effect, 2 months or 3 months or whatever time it takes to do the outreach? Is that what you're thinking?
Probably the changes that we're proposing right now aren't really changing the intent of the code as it was drafted. So I personally think that it could be effective immediately. It's just the outreach materials we'll probably want to queue up to make sure that they're ready. The biggest changes would probably be for the development tree code. If somebody was applying for an ADU or trying to figure out if they needed a full development tree code application for, say, a garage conversion, we would just want to make sure we're keeping them in the loop of any potential adoption. So that way, we're not having folks develop a whole application and then we're essentially changing it where they just spent a lot of time on it.
Yeah, I appreciate that. It's not the same thing as adopting the tree code. It's not as extensive, but I think that we need to communicate even smaller changes ahead of time, and that may be something as simple as a pilot article. I'm just hesitant to say, okay, done, and it's in force, and there's no outreach.
Oh, yeah, we can definitely do a pilot article and do some outreach ahead of time. Of course, I would just want to make sure that we're timing it so that way we don't inform people too early. And then
There's timing with the pilot as well,
Yes.
And you got to figure all that in.
And then another option, that we likely do is actually we have a list of arborists and tree care companies. And so we'd probably send a letter directly to those companies as well to make sure that they're informed of any changes.
Related to the outreach on the, I do drive around with a magnet on the side of my car. It says, get a permit.
It's a great looking magnet.
Little tree. Thank you. So I do drive around a little bit and get some outreach on that. But a lot of the changes that we're proposing were kind of like, I wouldn't say loopholes, but we're filling in the holes in the cheese a little bit. So the pilot bringing it forward is a great idea as far as the outreach goes, but the changes are, as the code itself is pretty minimal. As far as my enforcement, it's kind of, everything's kind of there. It's just easier to do the job the way and the judge won't throw it out.
And it'll be well timed as well for our Arbor Day celebration, which will be at the end of October. And so we'll definitely have tree code outreach and education at that event. And we're happy to. I think it's important for us to just continually do. We've been talking about doing more outreach and education, just raising awareness. I think now things are settling. Folks probably forgetting the postcards they got in the mail. Might be time for another postcard.
And I don't know how many times after adoption I said to Natalie, I go, we don't know what we don't know when related to this code. And it went through so many edits and stuff. And I just said, well, we put it on the list of, well, we didn't know that. And we need to make an edit.
So article on the pilot. Anything else that you want out of the engagement? Or is that
I just want, some level of outreach, I just don't want it to
magically appear?
be done in the dead of night,
Sounds good. We can do that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Other questions? No? Okay, I do have a few questions on some of the language or suggestions. So looking at page 572, which is the definitions section, I'm looking at the strike-through version, so it's the first It's the definition section. So you added the definition of topping that we talked about. And the last sentence of that says topping is considered tree removal. So I feel like 5 or 6 lines down, we have a definition of tree removal, and somehow we should cross-reference this includes topping or something. You know, we should just close the loop between those two. Page 569, there's a definition of damaged tree. Tree that's damaged or knocked down to the extent that mortality or serious deterioration is likely to occur or partially pushed over so as to result in permanent lien or visible damage to the root system. Are we talking about nature doing that? Are we talking about cars doing that? Are we talking about intentional versus like accidentally car doing that versus somebody's really trying to get rid of a tree?
It could be all of the above.
Yeah.
When it's a act of God, so if there's a storm event, if there's something that the tree is coming down, we honestly don't go towards code enforcement for that. We see it as this tree came down and we're going to go clean up the mess as it's in the right of way. And we ask for retroactive permits if it's safe and folks are able to do so. Typically, if there's, trees coming down in a storm event, we're pretty aware that there's a big storm event happening, and we got eyes on the road all the time. And, we've rarely seen a situation where folks are trying to pass it off as an accident. There are situations where, we've had police reports of somebody hitting a tree and driving away, or there's incidents where, it was an accidental gash, car collision. Those are likely the situations where it would be considered a damaged tree. Really, where the damaged tree might come into play is, again, if we're actually trying to work with the applicant or whoever might have caused the tree damage to try to mitigate. So that way, we don't want to remove a tree. A tree might be damaged and it might not need removal. Oftentimes it does because there's a lot of care that goes into it. And, it's usually we don't hear about just the bumps of a tree. But, there are situations where it could be on a construction site. This is where our protection zones and protection fencing comes in, where the tree is damaged because some equipment scraped up on it. So we needed a classification where the tree is damaged. It might not need removal. It might need renewal, but it's essentially like a status before we can actually make a decision.
Okay, so you don't feel like we need to distinguish between acts of God and acts of man or anything like that?
Personally think it starts to get very messy, I think. And we'll see. Maybe we'll come back in a year or so and say, we're wrong. We need more definition.
Okay. I don't know if Tim will remember this, but when I was a fairly new resident of Milwaukie, he came to my house because an apple tree fell over in not even a storm, but just like wet soil, and fell over. And I thought it was in the right of way. So I called the city, and he came out and he goes, yeah, there's nothing to do for that tree. You can cut it up. And later when I added a sidewalk and had to survey, I found out it was actually in my property. It wasn't in the right of way. But anyway, that was my first experience with the tree issues in Milwaukie.
And a great example of that, we actually had a staff person reach out and they said, I have a great big tree in my yard and a big old limb fell down from it and now I need to remove this tree. And we helped them through it. And really it's like a triage of tree. And so it's like right now it's damaged and you just remove the damaged parts of the limb and then let's do an evaluation. And yep, we need to actually remove the tree. But there's usually signs of rot and all sorts of stuff. So it's kind of a bit of a mystery, but we try to sleuth it out.
Yeah. The thing you said earlier about the internal ADUs, I guess I thought we had, that's always been, that's like, and it came up earlier in the talk about stormwater fees. I believe, you'd want to talk to planning to confirm, but I believe that, we allow an internal and an external, attached and a detached ADU. But I guess when we were talking about this code last year, I thought we carved out something that doesn't expand the floor plan, the footprint of the home doesn't have
So the way that we had it originally, and we still have it right now, is expansion of the building footprint, which is also a definition we added for building footprint. That could include an overhang, eaves, anything like that technically is an expansion of the building footprint. So that's one of where it starts to get a little tricky. But we had essentially reduced the requirements down to the protection standard, being that you need to throw up, tree protection fencing, and you need to essentially make sure that the trees on site are safe. But also with that protection standard comes bonding requirements, which can be pretty costly. And we actually faced a few situations and where, folks were kind of upset because they're like, we're not going anywhere near these trees. Why do we have to spend all the time and money to submit a full arborist plan, a full inventory, a full technically appraisal just to do essentially an attic conversion? And so that's where we saw the opportunity to say, hey, the bonds are really there to make sure that those trees are protected, and there's essentially an incentive for folks to take care of those trees. I think education around the non-development tree code, essentially now, especially with our updated enforcement, saying if those trees are damaged, if they are, needed to get removed, they're considered a healthy tree removal that's unpermitted. And that could be pretty dang costly. It's in your best interest to do tree protection fencing where you think it's best needed, and essentially letting them be the carers of those trees, knowing the repercussions. That's what we feel would be a good, essentially, compromise, knowing that our non-development tree code still offers good protections, knowing we still need to do education. We're still in those pre-application meetings and pre-construction meetings, but it just reduces, at least on our administrative need, as well as the applicants, to work with an arborist to develop all these submittal requirements. Because even with, I think for the reduced requirements, we said you didn't need to even work with an arborist. But for bonding right now, you need an appraisal, which has to be done by an arborist. So it's, again, another little loop that we're trying to solve.
Yeah, great. And so 2 just kind of editorial suggestions that you can take or leave. But I noticed you had gone through and stricken the word master in front of fee schedule. I just wanted to suggest that in the schedule that was presented to us in the work session, they were using the word consolidated fee schedule. So if that's going to be our term, then you probably want to insert that consolidated here. And I'm glad we're getting away from the word master there. And then I think this code could benefit from a table of contents. I had to do a lot of tracking back and going back, and am I in the right of way for the public tree code or so I started looking at that and I thought, it really could benefit from a table of contents maybe.
I think we've had some internal discussions on structuring this maybe a little different. I think the question is more of when's the right time to grab it and tear it apart.
Right.
I would agree.
Right.
I'll talk to Scott about table of contents, how that works. I'll have to learn. It'll be my first code table of contents, so I'm willing to learn.
All right. Any other questions, comments, discussion items? Okay. I think it looks good. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. And our last item for tonight, well, not our last item, but our last business item is business registration code amendments. And I believe the finance director is going to present this.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Toby LaFrance, Finance Director. I'm happy to be in front of you this evening to talk about some recent going on with the business registration process. And we are before you tonight. It's a discussion item. We don't have any changes for code in front of you or the fee table at this point in time. Want to make you aware of the business tax code generally, some of the recent discussions that we've been having, and seeking guidance from council on next steps in the staff recommendation that's in your staff report. The staff report outlines in a lot of detail what's been happening and what's been going on. What I'll do is I will kind of present some highlights from that, and then open it up for discussion and hopefully eventual direction from the council. So just some really general things on the code itself. First, what does it mean to be conducting business in the city of Milwaukie? And the second bullet on this slide defines it and talks about it being an enterprise, an establishment, a store, a shop, a number of different things where you're conducting the nature of the business directly or indirectly for a private profit or a benefit. And the first bullet here basically says, and if you're doing that, then you need to do it with a registration and paying your business tax. In the very beginning of this chapter of our code, it states that the business taxes imposed by this chapter are for revenue purposes only. It doesn't elaborate beyond that. Now, I will say internally, administratively, we also use that list as a way to communicate with the business community within the city of Milwaukie. And so it is useful for us to know who's conducting business. So while it doesn't state that in the code, that is a secondary purpose for of how this gets used. Code also talks about if you've got multiple businesses in a single location, then you need multiple business licenses. Likewise, if you've got a single business, a franchise that has multiple locations, each one of those locations needs to have a business license. And the code does provide for a few exclusions. I'm not listing them all here. However, some of them are things like the nonprofits, garage sales, sale of personal items, so you want to sell your car, that kind of thing. And also, if you are a business, a contractor who has a metro license, you don't need to get a separate City of Milwaukie license. Current fees, our annual license is $187 plus $10 per FTE. If you start conducting business after the midpoint of the calendar year, it's essentially cut in half. And we do have a 2-week temporary license, which is $30. So recently, a couple months ago, internally, we were discussing about planning for community events. And the question arose about business license. And so we have new people in the city of Milwaukie. I'm one of them. And when something comes up where you don't know the answer, you go and you dive into code, see what does code say. And as I was just kind of outlining, the code states that if you're conducting business in the city of Milwaukie, you need to get a business license. So that was, that requirement was communicated. There was a number of subsequent communications. I think it's outlined really well in your staff report. And eventually a letter going out to the organizations, First Friday Farmers Market, for them to then distribute to their vendors. That's also attached to the packet. And ultimately, in order to give time to have the discussion we're starting tonight, city manager, under the consolidated fee schedule, has the authority to waive fees, and that was done for the vendors in for First Friday and Farmers Market for this season. So this also got me to look to see what's going on in some of our neighboring cities. And so I sent an email with 4 questions to 12 of our neighboring cities, heard back from 8. And essentially the questions were, under your code, would a vendor at a farmer's market need to get a license? Secondly, are they getting licenses? Third, are you enforcing the code at your farmer's market? And then lastly, what is the fee? And the general majority response we received is that under their code, yes, they're supposed to get a license. And they are not enforcing that at their markets. Two of the cities did provide exemptions. In Lake Oswego, they have in code, I mentioned in our code, we have a list of exemptions. Lake Oswego exempts what they call city-sponsored events. They consider their farmers market a city-sponsored event. Another city with the event permitting process that gave the exemption. There was one city, the city of Tigard, where that city does enforce the license requirement, and it's done through the farmers market itself. So the farmers market, part of their handbook and part of the requirement to have a stall is that you have a valid and current business license from the city of Tigard. And fees range from as low as $25 to as much as $80 for some version of a temporary permit. So just kind of wrapping up, the staff recommendation at this point in time, we would like to have your support for us to go and meet with the community event organizers, potentially the vendors also from our community events, review and discuss options with them, find out what their concerns are, considerations, and then by January, return to council, summarize the feedback, and potentially bring back any code changes and or changes to the fee schedule that we think could be helpful. And that ends the staff presentation.
Question?
Yes, thank you. So just to reiterate, 2 cities provide exemptions, so they exempt the farmer's market from having to get any sort of permitting or business licenses, correct?
They exempt the vendors at the farmer's market from having to get.
But the market itself gets the license and the vendors are covered. So
in Lake Oswego, neither the market nor the vendors get a license. My understanding, Hillsborough, they have a special event permit, and so the market gets the permit, and as part of their code with their special event permit, any vendors that are part of the special event are exempted from having to get their own business license.
yeah, that was the only question that I had.
Councilor Massey?
This may be a question that may come up in your discussions, but do you see any differences between the farmers market and First Friday vendors?
Not as it pertains to the way our code is written. And in that case, I mean, Justin could be much more eloquent in this. However, The general gist is at both of those locations, you have people who are selling things. And it doesn't matter if it's more of a sort of a craft hobby and you're turning clay, and really you're taking that money just so you can buy more clay and continue to have your hobby. That's still conducting business. And that's treated the same and currently in our code as if you are a whiskey distillery that comes to the farmer's market and sells your wares there.
I agree on a legal basis, but I just see a big difference in the nature of those businesses. When you look at the farmer's market versus what I see at First Friday. Now, are there some at First Friday that are more like the farmer's market vendors? Yes. But, you see some hobbyists at First Friday. And so it's just a question, because I understand legally in the current code, they're not different, but I see, by nature, a difference.
So I think one of the things we struggle with is how do we word the difference?
Yep.
Right now, the discussions that staff have been having are if you're receiving a city permit to be on city property, what direction do we want to go? We looked at the word hobbyist. We had a discussion about whether or not there were terms that would lend itself to being able to differentiate different types of vendors. We struggled based on the IRS definition on whether or not staff would be able to make that differentiation with the applications. So I hear you. I hear why you see them as different. I'm not sure how we could codify it.
Yeah, I understand the dilemma.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would also add, I guess, that right now, coming out of COVID, First Friday, and perhaps even prior to COVID, before First Fridays was canceled, it's kind of a new event, right? We could be 5-6 years down the road where First Friday is a huge event, and much larger, right? And so you get real difficult. It's really difficult to work on definitions in a code environment that scale, right? You end up, we've got 2 events, generically speaking, that apply for special event permits. They receive those permits, and as a result of the permit they received, we have vendors that come in and sell goods. Right. And so it's, I hate to put it in such stark terms. There's a lot of gray in there too. It's just really difficult to codify it.
Well, and I would say my impression is that the First Friday vendors, now we have more, it's a startup event at this point, and it is more hobbyists. We did have more established vendors, I guess, I feel like, in the old First Friday and the pre-COVID First Friday, for sure.
And I say all of that, not advocating one position or the other, right? Yeah. All I'm trying to say is that and for whatever reason they existed before and whatever fees they paid before, they were never not paying those fees under an exemption that exists in our code. And that's the issue that has arisen in the context of First Friday, and that, then that begged the question about the farmers markets, which started this whole process.
So what, the previous first iteration of First Friday prior to COVID, what was the process then? Did they go through what we're discussing now?
I believe they received a special events permit, but I don't believe the businesses paid the business tax.
They have not been. So part of what happened, I'll own it. When I got here, the city manager prior to me had been waiving the fees. I met with Dave Aschenbrenner, and we talked about it. And based on the fact that we had waivers, and I believe from like 3 different city managers, I waived it. I didn't look at the code. That's on me. So it wasn't until we saw some staff transition where we realized that the waiver and the waiver maybe 1 year would be one thing, but doing it consistently from city management on an annual basis far exceeds $1,000. So I feel fine with the fact that we were transparent with council, we were doing it, but there's a point where we really need council to decide, is this a permanent thing we want to do, or do we want to do something else? To make, okay.
I think that's fair. And I think we can, you know, whatever council chooses to direct, we can work and bring back some concepts for you to look at code-wise. We're pulling from, you know, sister jurisdictions in the region to look to see what they've done. You know, Toby has shared some of those with you. I find it humorous from a code perspective that some of the cities have code that requires the folks to pay business taxes or fees or whatever they do, but then they don't enforce it, right? They deprioritize the enforcement of it, which is fine. If that's the state of affairs, then why not carve out an exemption?
Did you have other questions? No.
I do very much appreciate the desire to want to know who's conducting business in the city, regardless of whether there's a fee associated with it, both for emergency purposes, but also general liability purposes, to know who's selling and what they're selling or whatever. That way, if we do get a complaint or something, we're able to find what we need to find.
Well, so that gets to one of my questions, which is I do think there's perhaps inherently a difference between vendors who are selling crafty things and vendors who are selling food, right? Food has, you know, there's all kinds of potential issues that can arise with food in terms of safety and stuff. So I do get that need for some accounting, some accounting and accountability. You mentioned, though, tying it to use of city property, right? Because I do wonder if we don't do that, do we go down some slippery slope where we're now doing church bazaars and we're doing the high school when they sell mattresses to raise money for the whatever team? And
That's part of what we're trying to avoid here.
Yeah.
We're on city property. We really need to be enforcing city ordinance, whatever that is. It can change the ordinance.
Yeah.
We just need to be enforcing that ordinance. So that was part of why, and I really appreciate how Toby and Emma handled that part of the conversation for today. We're really focusing on places where we knowingly are certifying that somebody is selling a product here in town. Going back to the food piece, I agree. And I also think some of the things that we run into where it would be helpful, a police incident. Knowing who's nearby, which vendors are around, like, yes, and the money has been less important for me as the information to be able to contact people when something arises. Farmers market's a big deal. First Fridays can be, depending on how big they become. Just knowing who's in town and how to get a hold of them is really helpful for us, for the public safety team, for others. So, that's just something to keep in mind. Is the example I've been using, just so people hear it in the community, has been a boil water notice. That's why the food piece is important. For those of you who didn't get to witness me on my second week of work or first week of work, it was quite humorous. Me trying to run up and down the street telling people we had a boil water notice, first in 100 years. I'd like to not do that. So having an email list, being able to generate that list quickly and contact people who may have sprayed their food with water or use that water in the production of their food is important to us for that public safety reason.
So I had a couple other questions for Toby, I guess. First off, I think, what you proposed to us, should we come back in January with a proposal? Should we consult everybody and come back in January? Yes, I see. That makes perfect sense to me. But a couple of things to think about in that process. Should we stop calling it a business tax? I will tell you that about 7 years ago, it might have been before Ann was here, I'm not sure. We had a big discussion with the the finance director at the time who gave us, about actually having a more robust business tax and what our options were for taxing businesses. Because what we have right now doesn't feel like a tax. It feels like a registration fee or, whatever you want to call it. So that's one thing to think about. The other thing I was curious as to what are you finding? And maybe you haven't been asking this question because it wasn't one of the four you put up there, but I'd be curious, what are other cities doing in terms of taxing businesses? Are many doing what we do, which is the, base fee plus a per FTE charge? What do other cities have by way of business taxes?
So most of, and of the 12 that I contacted, the two largest, Portland and Vancouver, have a business tax where they are basing it upon
revenues.
And in Portland is based upon gross annual income, and in Vancouver is based upon gross annual income, and in Portland is based upon net annual income. The majority are just they're doing what I think it would more frequently be called a business license. Depending. Some of them have very complicated tables. Some of them have pretty simple tables. Ours is pretty simple, and it's a flat fee plus something. That's where I'd say the majority are. And in terms of some of the other areas of code, you talk about renaming it. There might be some low-hanging fruit like that. What we're not proposing, I want to be clear, is we are proposing in our staff recommendation a fairly focused outreach. We don't have the staff resources to do sort of a holistic, let's open up the business license code or business tax code. We want to address this need of the community right now. And kind of keep ourselves focused. That said, if there's some low-hanging fruit, like what we're calling it, we can get to that.
I also wanted to add that Toby's pulling together a training for you all on just what your financial options are when you're looking at ways to capture revenue from the community. We've had these conversations in the past. You mentioned that Bonnie led that one. But I think it's important. It's good to know what your toolbox is. So we'll be doing that, I think, this fall.
Yeah.
Great.
I believe November, it's 14th.
Okay. Any other comments or questions from people?
Just a comment. Just something that when going into these discussions, just so I'm a bigger fan of the exemption. And I think maybe the trade-off is that because the farmer's market is already, I'm sure they have a roster of their vendors and they keep the contact information. So maybe the trade-off is we hold the farmer's market and First Friday responsible for maintaining that roster. And the trade-off would be in exchange for an exemption. Because certain things, the phrase, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And I would hate to have to implement, I get that it's in the code right now, right, that we have to enforce it. So I understand that. So that's why we're doing this. But I would hate to drastically change that to where potentially it would harm. Because, I mean, let's be honest, Milwaukie is not a huge bustling business community. We have to hang on to what we can. And as a former business owner in Milwaukie, I know exactly how important First Friday was to us. Those were our busiest days down at the food cart pod. So I would hate to take away people's ability, or maybe not take away, but you might not have some of these smaller vendors ever want to come out. They might be too concerned that maybe it's going to harm them in some way. We just don't know how that's going to be. But I think it would be a good trade-off if we put that onus on First Friday, the organization that handles that, and the farmers market in exchange. It's an exemption. Just a thought to go into the discussions on, just from my perspective.
And I have spoken with Councilor Kasrabadi about this. I just wanted to make sure to add a couple of things. One is we can.
Yeah.
What we would need is we would need to have that list readily available and provided to the city. That is and there would need to be some recourse if it wasn't. So that's one of the things we ran into when we were talking with Tim, is that without having the fee levied, there's not actually an enforcement mechanism.
Right.
So there's got to be, that is the enforcement mechanism. You didn't pay. It's not that you didn't provide us with the information. So we would have to shift that part of the code if we were going to go down that path.
So like a fine or something if that wasn't provided? Yeah,
Okay.
I think that's fair.
Thanks.
Anything else? Anything else from you? You think you
So
have?
I'm just going to summarize that council is providing support for the staff recommendation as is written in the staff report, and we will see you by January.
And I also just wanted, he may have said it, I wasn't in the room at the very beginning. I have a deep, deep appreciation. This sort of happenstance.
Yeah.
And the people in the back of the room showed up in a really helpful way. And I mean that. I really appreciate how our vendors have been working with us trying to solve this, how First Friday and the farmers market have really come to the table in multiple meetings to try and find a good solution that works. So thank you all for your ongoing partnership. We really appreciate it. I also wanted to call out, I went on vacation when this hit. So I deeply appreciate that Emma stepped into my shoes second week, third week of work, and really tried without having standing relationships to form those relationships. So I just wanted to call out an appreciation of her too. Thank you.
And also appreciation to you, Anne, for
Going on vacation.
No, that too, you deserve it.
Thank you.
But for doing the waivers all this time, that you didn't have to do that. You could have been from the beginning. This could have been an issue, but the fact that you did that, it's appreciated.
These are really important partnerships and really important events. These make community, and we don't want to lose them.
Absolutely. And thank you, Emma, too.
Good night, y'all.
Okay, it looks like we have some public comment that wants to, yeah. Okay, so you can comment and then fill the yellow form out after the fact, if you'd like to, yeah? If anybody else is wanting to comment, you should get a yellow form and you can do the same.
Let's see if he gets it right.
So please state your name and, you're a business owner, so we don't care about your residence.
Dean, I'm here tonight with Celebrate Milwaukie, which is the parent company of the farmers market. Just a clarification. So right now, I think we are supposed to provide, all of our vendors are supposed to provide the information. Is that still in effect?
It is. So as of right now, we've asked that they provide their information through our online system. There is no fee required, but we do need to collect it until we solve the problem, whatever that solution is. And I think they did it. I think we actually had a large number of the vendors participate.
I don't know.
Okay.
We don't see that.
We can get you a list too, just to make sure that you have that as well. Yeah. Is that it?
That's all for tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it, Mark.
We'll come back with more.
Okay. Anybody else?
I'll fill out form.
So my name is Shalina Havens, and I'm co-chair for the First Friday Milwaukie that's being recreated down here. And I've been a business owner of Milwaukie for over 12 years now. And I really appreciate the community that the First Friday events create, the farmers market creates, and stuff like that. And the opportunity that maybe not so much the farmers market, but that we're trying to create with the First Friday is to have people who are want to be crafters, want to get their name out, but majority of them make less than $2,000 a year. So as long as that is taken into consideration of that these are hobbyists, we do have some artists that actually have real art, and but we also have a lot of informational booths for the Cub Scouts, the Scouts come out, we have midwifery groups, we have the North Clackamas school districts, we have vendors that aren't really providing economic input, that kind of stuff. And we waive our vendor fees for them because, we're charging $20 to provide so that we can cover our costs for the insurance and stuff like that. So we're trying to piece it together. The point of this is that as long as we're not doing it to make money and profit, but to get people out there. And we've had people who, because of the farmers market, have then be able to like find like an online business and be able to be successful. And they kind of like, they don't need to come to the farmers market anymore. But that stepping stone is really kind of like a crucial thing. And that they're not like full-time businesses is really something that I really want to like hone in on and just make sure that that's something that's in consideration for like, and I've taken a poll and the $50 seems like a really reasonable rate for most people. They're like, $50 is totally great. You get into 75, they're like, yeah. But like, so that's my comment. And thank you guys very much for like the waivers and like working with us while we're getting this together. And I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay,
Thank you for reviving the event.
Yeah. Yeah, the event is off to a great start. Yeah. Anybody else? Mr. Ashenbrenner's gonna be quiet tonight. Okay.
If David won't speak, I might just add one thing, and thanks, Anne, for the kind words, but really thanks to these folks who did help orient me to Milwaukee in my first weeks, and we're lovely. And I just, in the staff report, you will see not only have they met with us, have they given their time, have they really, been great partners in this. Celebrate Milwaukee did put forward a kind of starter proposal for us to discuss that kind of gets to this specific niche we're talking about here, which is we have provided a special event permit. Is there something in that mechanism that we can be looking at? So that's something we'll also look at in addition to code cleanup and fee schedule and all these things. But I just want to kind of reiterate that point and thank Celebrate Milwaukee and First Friday. It's been a great process so far, and I look forward to the continued conversation.
Great. Thank you. Thank you. Well, if there's nothing else from counselors, I think we can close that one out. So that's the end of our business items. We have no public hearings. So we usually close out with council reports of meetings people have attended. And I see Councilor Massey has some notes here, so.
And Mayor, when we're done with those, can I add one?
Oh, sure.
Thanks. Okay.
So last week I attended the North Clackamas Watershed Council Board meeting, and let me preface this before I get into the business side of the meeting, is that this was the first in-person meeting that the council has had since the pandemic. And we had it at a very interesting place. It was at the property of Mr. William Finley. And Mr. Finley lived in Oregon from 1876 to 1953. And I had never heard of Mr. Finley. And he was a pioneer in wildlife photography. And he became quite well known, and he was instrumental in convincing President Theodore Roosevelt to establish 3 wildlife refuges in the state. He was the state's first game warden who put in the first game and fishing laws and hired all the game wardens and that kind of thing. And he was the state biologist for a period of time and wrote many books. But it was quite interesting because I had never heard of this fellow. So look him up, William Finley.
He had a role in creating Audubon Society for Oregon.
His list is long. He was the first. He was the first president of the Oregon Audubon Society and that kind of thing. And so he's just a fascinating character. But this was at his house. It's got I couldn't believe this place is so big. It's like 9 acres down there at Oak Lodge. But at any rate, I'll get to the business part. But I just thought Mr. Finley was a fascinating character when I looked him up. So basically, the key business event for the meeting was the adoption of the budget for next year, and that was adopted, and it's $1.4 million. Really 1.3 is really obligated, and they're keeping up $100,000 as sort of a reserve. One of the big issues is that the council has had a fundraising, committee, and they've basically are transitioning it to a finance committee because they really have to be in the mode of managing this grant money and not just fundraising. I'll get to fundraising in a minute. And so I asked the question of Neil, you know, with all of this federal money coming in, it always comes with a lot of oversight, audit, justification of expenses and that kind of thing. And were they really prepared for that? And he said, it's going to be a challenge. And he brought up this subject that there's a program where nonprofits get really certified to, you know, do their own oversight. And it's kind of like, think about an international standards organization certification. In other words, you come in, you get a cert, you're periodically, you know, recerted like every few years, but the day-to-day things, the various divisions and departments have passed on you to have the various controls, you know, two-party justification for expenditures and everything like that. But it's kind of a big hurdle to get through. But they think it might be beneficial in the long run. And Laura Rose, who works for Xerces, says that the Xerces Society has done that. And she says, yeah, it's a big hurdle to get through, but it pays off in the long run. So I'm encouraged that they're going to do that, because this could be, you know, all encompassing, justifying, you know, expenditures of this, you know, amount of money and that kind of thing. The core sampling is going, not as quick as they would like it, but Interflu has basically said that once the samples are done, the analysis goes pretty quick. And the sort of the critical juncture in that is that the hydraulic study should be ready in the time frame of about October, which would define the width of the channel, which is the key part that ODOT needs to build the bridge. And they were complimentary of the city with the bridge that we did on our side, that it's already wide.
Not so wide.
It's nice and wide. So we sort of overpromised and overdelivered, so we're not going to be the holdup there.
Well, to be really fair, Chuck Eaton actually believed in this project that you're talking about tonight, and that's why I did it.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah. So at any rate there, that's going to be the critical point on the PERT chart here, is defining the width of the channel requirement. And so there's concern on Neil's part that, one, they're going to be so focused, you know, on the execution of Kellogg, these initial stages, that he's concerned that they're going to lose focus on fundraising, okay? Because, you know, you get through these initial phases, and there's still going to be a price tag with the expenditures required down the road. And so that's his biggest concern right now. And they feel like at some point they're going to have to hire someone else. Yeah. Any questions?
What's been the issue of getting the core samples?
The soil is really unstable. You know, they have to put this barge or work platform in to do the core samples. And so they have to do on both the lower lake and the upper lake on either side of the railroad trestles, because they're different, you know. And so the soil is really unstable to take, a crane in down there close to the water to put it in. In other words, they can't put it in one place and then take it to the other, because the trestle's in between, you know. And so it has to be dropped in, picked up, dropped in again. Yeah. So they're trying to solve that. Yeah.
And I feel like I've received an update on this today, but I'm not an engineer. So I am not going to provide additional information. But I can have Tessie watch this tomorrow and give a quick update.
Good.
That'd be great. And the October date for stuff is good. I mean, that's okay. That's not delaying things.
Evidently not.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay. Good. And that's no other meetings from you. Okay.
Yes,
Had.
I have two.
Yep.
Actually, I did attend the DAC meeting.
Oh, right. Which is the NCPRD District Advisory Board.
Yes.
Yep.
As well as the West meeting, which is actually why I couldn't make it to the volunteer dinner. So, boo. But the DAC meeting, they elected a new chair. It's Ryan Stee, who's now the new chair. They discussed the budget for the Concord, the 3-acre Concord project. Nothing was said about Milwaukie Bay Park. Unfortunately, the only thing that was mentioned is that Commissioner Salvas just stepped up to the podium to let him know that we filed an appeal, and that's about all he can say at this moment. There was a gentleman who made public comment, however, who's been working on Milwaukie Bay Park, I think from its inception, who was pleading with NCPRD to start committing to their commitments for Milwaukie Bay Park so we can get this thing done that's been sitting in limbo for quite some time. I did find it interesting how the Concord project has been able to get significant amount of funding, and it's a lot newer than Milwaukie Bay Park, and we've been struggling. So I thought that was kind of interesting. Other than that, there wasn't anything outside of just discussing that project and then the vote for chair. As far as West, oh, sorry, did anybody have questions on the DAC?
Oh, I think that's, yeah. I had a feeling, because they had deferred a couple issues, so I had a feeling it was going to be a fairly short meeting.
The next meeting.
Yeah.
Yeah, their goal, I think the goal setting is what's been pushed to the next meeting.
Yeah.
As far as West, it was just a project presentation. There's quite a few projects actually that are going on Kellogg Creek. I know we had an email about a week and a half ago about some early morning work being done. But they are actually going to be working on the Kellogg Creek Influent Pump Station, the Kellogg Creek Aeration Basin Improvement, Kellogg Creek Secondary Clarifier Rehab, and the Kellogg Creek Admin Building. Out of all those, I only know what the admin building really is. I'm not quite sure what others are, but I'm gonna do some studying. But I did find out that an interceptor is larger pipes that convey water to the treatment center, kind of like the arteries. So I'm learning. But that's about it. They just went over their projects. They have quite a bit of funds, lucky them, so they can work on quite a bit of things right now. So that is it. Any questions on Kellogg Creek or Wes?
No, I don't think so. Yeah. All right. Well, thank you, both of you, for your reports. I have not attended anything lately to report on.
Mayor,
Okay.
may I have a minute?
Oh, that's right. Yes.
Okay, two things. Number one, because he's here, which means we can torment him. I wanted to call out Mr.
Coach?
Milwaukie,
Yeah.
Mr. Coach Milwaukie. He does a lot of things here. And I love that he is our code enforcement officer, but he is also an amazing coach. And this last week, he took first in the county and fourth in state with his team.
Yeah.
And I should disclose that Scott's son also played on that team.
Right,
Yeah.
nice. Very good, very good. Yeah.
The other thing that I wanted to talk about is I had a really great lunch last week with the superintendent for the school district. And they have a new board, we have a new council. We would like to talk to you about getting the two together and having a joint meeting. So if you all are amenable, our thought process is that it would be a Thursday. That's when their meetings usually are. Because of everybody's schedule, it's probably this spring. So we were going to propose February or March and just find dates that would work for them on one of their Thursdays. Is that so far any concerns generally work for people?
As long as it's not Valentine's Day in February.
I have given up all my Valentine's Day for this council, but no, I will find out when it is, and I can mark that as a please don't do that.
Thank you. Spare me, thanks.
Yeah.
We have some things to talk about. They jointly approve our Northwest Housing Alternatives housing piece that we did years ago for property abatement. We also have like our SRO. There's the variety of things we work on with the school district. So we'll come up with an agenda together. But I do think housing and keeping families in Milwaukie is a big shared part of where both agencies are. Sound good?
Yep.
Awesome.
Okay, thank you.
Sounds great. Anything else? Anyone? Yeah, yeah.
I got to give a shout out to my son, Hunter. He won the individual sportsman award for the state tournament. This week. That was pretty cool. There's 90 kids, and he somehow stood out in the minds of board members, umpires, other coaches and stuff. So anyway, I just got to give a shout out to my son, Hunter. So.
It's a reflection of good coaching and parenting.
I would say probably the latter first.
Congratulate Mary Beth for us, by the way. Thank you.
All right. Well, congratulations, Tim and Hunter. And what's your son's name? Oliver, not Oliver. Henry. Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah, I got to watch a little bit of one of the games and it was fun. All right, well, if there's nothing else, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
I motion to adjourn.
A second.
It's been moved and seconded to adjourn. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? None heard? We are adjourned.
Hey, nice job.
Well done.
30 minutes early.